As he bashed Trump at Oscars, viewers noticed embarrassing secret Kimmel didn't want out. While hosting the Oscars, flaming leftist Jimmy Kimmel seized the opportunity to once again relentlessly bash President Donald Trump. However, as he unleashed his anti-Trump jokes, viewers noticed something embarrassing Kimmel hoped wouldn't get out. It isn't enough that Hollywood's liberal elitists relish every chance to grant themselves awards for playing pretend, they simply must turn each event into a flagrantly biased roast of the most prominent conservatives and their political causes. Much like the sports industry, show business has mutated into a proverbial soapbox exclusively for hardcore leftists to push their propaganda and passive-aggressively mock those who dare disagree with their extremist values. Despite consistently sabotaging their own financial success with box office bust after bust, liberal Hollywood can't resist injecting their fascistic vitriol into every production, just as we continue to see in their lavish, self-aggrandizing awards ceremonies. However, their latest stunt not only fell flat with the few viewers that actually tuned in, it may have also given away one of their most pathetic and humiliating secrets. During the 2018 Oscars ceremony, liberal darling Jimmy Kimmel didn't fail to deliver on his promise to ignore the victims of his own industry's sexual predators and focus on lambasting President Donald Trump. However, as the smug late-night host incessantly berated America's elected president, viewers noticed something bizarre taking place throughout Kimmel's petulant monologue. In a tweet posted by political pundit Matt Drudge, viewers agreed that Kimmel's jokes received very limited audience engagement, despite the fact that the audio showcased wild applause and vocalization, suggesting that producers were forced to supplement the liberal host's impotent punchlines with a laugh track and applause track. By comparison, Drudge noted that even liberal news outlets captured a much more powerful reaction to President Trump's Gridiron Club dinner jokes without the use of audio enhancement. Trump jokes last night at Gridiron much funnier than Kimmel's Oscar monologue. Producers have laugh track and applause track amped up, while camera shots of audience don't match any intensity. Oscar Hano penis, Drudge tweeted. For those willing to witness what Drudge is talking about for themselves, you can watch Kimmel's monologue in the footage below, paying special attention as the camera pans the audience. Of course, Drudge's suspicion wasn't the only detail suggesting that the Oscars and liberal Hollywood, in general, are committing suicide through political pandering. According to Breitbart, the 90th Annual Academy Awards plummeted a colossal 16%, earning the ceremony the lowest ratings in the history of the Oscars. And the ratings to prove it. 18.9 appears to be an all-time low for the Oscars, below the previous low ratings point for the Oscars, logged with the 2008 telecast, 21.9. One Twitter user replied to another tweet which said, "More anodyne drivel from Jimmy Kimmel as he obsequiously adheres to Hollywood's liberal Democratic Party orthodoxy." Variety reports that the 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. portion of ABC's telecast averaged an 18.9 household rating and 32 share in Nielsen's metered market overnight ratings. That's down about 16% from the 22.537 rating generated by the 2017 Oscars. According to Deadline, the 18.9 appears to be an all-time low for the Oscars, below the previous low ratings point for the Oscars, logged with the 2008 telecast, 21.9. Of course, many outlets are blaming Kimmel for the ratings tanking along with the promotion of both liberal causes and box office bombs. In fact, 7 of the 9 nominees for Best Picture averaged only $47 million at the box office, indicating that just around 5 million Americans even saw the films. The massive ratings drop proves once again that Americans are sick of hearing the typical liberal rhetoric and arrogant chastisement that regularly comes from leftist Hollywood elitists, especially Kimmel. These entertainers simply can't comprehend that the nation doesn't want to be preached at by wealthy, privileged, hypocritical celebrities concerning issues that have nothing to do with their careers.
The fallout from the shooting a couple of days ago continues, as well it should. And again, it's this circular argument that has become highly irritating to everybody involved, in which people on the left scream, do something. People on the right say, well, what would you have us do? And then people on the left say, well, if you're even asking that question, it means you don't want to do something. That seems like the cycle of logic that is applied here. So Jimmy Kimmel, of course, is the leader in being the sort of emotional, the emotional avatar for the left. So he goes on his show last night, and he, of course, talks about the shooting and pushes hard for gun control with his usual caveats and freakouts about the NRA.
Another senseless shooting, this time at a high school in Parkland, Florida, where a gunman, a former student, opened fire yesterday. Again, 17 lives have been lost. More than a dozen people are hospitalized. Tell your buddies in Congress, tell Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and Marco Rubio, all the family men who care so much about their communities, that what we need are laws, real laws, that do everything possible to keep assault rifles out of the hands of people who are going to shoot our kids. Go on TV and tell them to do that. I'll tell you something.
Okay, go tell people what to do and what we need laws and what are these laws going to be. And you don't, the Congress works for us. They don't work for the NRA. This is one of the things that he was pushing, the idea that the NRA was responsible. We'll get to that in a minute. Again, all of this is just designed to make you believe that Jimmy Kimmel has a plan. Jimmy Kimmel doesn't have a plan. People on the left don't have a plan. And if they do have a plan, it really is to confiscate guns. Now, the minute that you say that about people on the left, they get very upset. No, we just want reasonable gun legislation. But then they can never name what the reasonable gun legislation is, because if they were to ban assault rifles, the reality is the vast majority of killings that are done with guns in the United States are not with assault rifles. Assault rifles are responsible for less murders in the United States than hands or knives. When people on the left say, well, what if we would just do better background checks? We have full background checks in the state of California, and that has not stopped the Isla Vista shooting. It did not stop the San Bernardino shooting. Again, the problem with these targeted gun laws is that what people on the left really want, if they were honest about it, they would say this. Piers Morgan, when I was on with him in 2013, he refused to say it, but then he finally came out and he was honest about it. What they really want is a UK-style government seizure of vast amounts of guns. That is not going to happen in the United States. They tried it in Australia. They tried a gun buyback program. Only 1/3 of all the guns were turned in Australia. They still have a murder rate in Australia with guns. They still have gun buybacks. It is illegal to own a gun in Australia, and yet people still own guns. 2/3 of the people who owned it before still own it. In the United States, if you were to grandfather in all of the guns that still are there are 300 million guns in the United States. So that would not actually solve the problem you're talking about, because a lot of the guns that are in hands of people who are going to commit school shootings in the future are already in those hands. Right? So you'd actually have to go around confiscating guns. Good luck trying to take guns away from 42% of the American public who say, 42% of households say that there's a gun in the house, right? There's a gun in my house. Right? The government would have to come to my house and take it from me. I'm not going to offer it back in a government buyback, and neither is anybody else who owns a gun. Those programs are wildly unsuccessful. Jimmy Kimmel has been the pace setter. He's the new pope of the left, according to Guy Benson, a good label, I think. And Jimmy Kimmel apparently appeared at he apparently appeared at some event for Pod Save America. So last week, remember, I criticized Stephen Colbert for having on Pod Save America after the State of the Union, because Stephen Colbert would never have me on after a State of the Union by a Democrat or a Republican. We have about the same size audience. Jimmy Kimmel obviously had to outdo his compatriot in leftist terms, because he is the new pope. And so he actually said at this event, quote, "It just so happens that almost every talk show host is a liberal, and that's because it requires a level of intelligence." So according to Jimmy Kimmel, the reason that he and his fellow talk show hosts are on the left is because they're smart, you see. It's not because they have a certain point of view and they all live in a bubble and they've all lived in big cities most of their lives. It's not because they spend all of their time hanging out with other people on the left and never have a dissenting conversation. It's not any of that stuff. It's just because they're so smart, you see. Right? Because Jimmy Kimmel, like on a pure IQ test, I'm sure Jimmy Kimmel, a guy who had women feel his crotch on national TV, would outdo me, I think, for example. I think when it comes to talk show hosts, put Jimmy Kimmel next to Dennis Miller. I'm sure that Jimmy Kimmel wildly outdoes Dennis Miller, a conservative. And there are a bunch of people saying, well, isn't he right? Aren't all the talk show hosts on the left? Well, no. The most successful talk show host of the last 35 years was Jay Leno, and Jay Leno is center-right. Jay Leno's a libertarian. So, no, this is stupidity all the way up. And it's so smug and it's so smarmy. And then you wonder why the culture is being torn apart. Like Jimmy Fallon showed up at the Super Bowl. And one of the things that happened, I'm not sure if they showed it on TV, they showed it at the game. There's a shot of him, and he kind of made a joke where he spilled water all over himself. And it was charming and it was funny. Right? And then after the game, Jimmy Kimmel has to join in the race to the political bottom. Like, whatever you think of Trump, you don't have to like Trump. But turning this into everything has to be a partisan fight, turning our late night show hosts into partisan fighters who can't make a joke about Barack Obama for 8 years and then can't stop making jokes about Trump, but not even jokes, just nasty riffs. How does that unify the country in any serious way? Serious criticisms of Trump, I'm perfectly willing to hear, although not from the likes of Jimmy Kimmel, who does not know what he's talking about on virtually any issue. We've debunked him 1,000 times on the show at this point.
Kimmel says, it just so happens that almost every talk show host is a liberal, and that's because, wait for it, it requires a level of intelligence. This is a guy who makes a living by saying other people's words into a camera and being applauded no matter what he says. And whenever he does use his own thoughts, he's proven to be almost 180 degrees wrong. His rant on Obamacare, the example he used, had nothing to do with the issue and was just emotional. Kimmel and people like him only appeal to the emotions. They cannot compete in the arena of ideas alone. They're too stupid to even realize that. And without their props and their glossy shows and their expensive TV sets, left to stand alone in the marketplace of ideas, they will fail.
To call Devin Nunes Donald Trump's lapdog would be an insult to dogs and laps. He's not a lapdog. He's more of a retriever. Here, boy, go write me a memo to smear the FBI. Good boy.
Jimmy Kimmel unleashing on House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes for writing the memo alleging surveillance abuse by the FBI and the Department of Justice. Kimmel attacking conservatives as well during a progressive podcast over the weekend. He said that almost every TV talk show host in late night is liberal because that requires a level of intelligence. Let's bring in our media panel. Joe Concha is media reporter for The Hill. Judy Miller, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, author, and Fox News contributor. So, Judy, this podcast is something that was put together by a bunch of former Obama administration officials. They invited Jimmy Kimmel on, and he says that if you're going to be a TV talk show host in late night, you got to be intelligent, and therefore conservatives need not apply. What do you think?
Well, Jimmy Kimmel finally said something funny, or at least liberals will find it funny. Conservatives just find it predictable and outrageous. I think Jimmy Kimmel should be working at MSNBC, which has an obviously anti-Trump, left-of-center, open and obvious point of view. But, you know, look, I may agree with Jimmy Kimmel on the sorry state of our health care system, and I may agree that our gun laws are outrageous, but I think that suggesting that people who are conservative are not intelligent is just over the top, over the line, outrageous, and it smacks of the smug satisfaction that helped elect Donald Trump. So I hope the Hillary Clinton viewers are happy, but for everybody else, take note. This kind of smugness really is going to backfire.
One way, Joe, to ensure that you don't last long in network television is to insult half your audience.
Well, yeah, I like what Kimmel said. He said, you know, it requires a certain level of intelligence. Actually, it requires a certain level of conformity. In other words, if I watch Kimmel or Colbert or Trevor Noah or Sam Bee, it's all the same thing. Judy Kurtz, who is a writer over at The Hill, she wrote a great story last week that said, is television headed for a dump on Trump overload? And, you know, perhaps we are, because how many times can we just do the same thing, one-trick pony over and over again? But to Judy's point, where she says she agrees with Jimmy Kimmel on health care, she's not agreeing with Jimmy Kimmel. Oh, no. According to the Daily Beast, last year they did a great report that Kimmel actually gets his talking points for his monologue, particularly on health care, directly from Chuck Schumer's office. Could you imagine Johnny Carson getting talking points from Daniel Patrick Moynihan? I mean, Carson didn't keep it political, and I think that's why he didn't lose half his audience, and that's probably a good thing. But Kimmel's already said, John, I don't care if Trump supporters watch. I could take him or leave him, don't need him, and that's the way things are going now in late night. They're only appealing to half the country. They don't seem to care.
Yeah. Right. Judy, there weren't a lot of Barack Obama jokes that Jimmy Kimmel passed along.
No, and I mean this kind of openly political, openly partisan late night talk show host is what's driving young people away from late night TV and towards social media, less and less towards television. And, you know, I think that people like Kimmel, He's talking to his audience, which is liberal, and if he wants to write off half of the country, that's fine. But, you know, have we gotten to the point where you can just write off people? Ultimately, they bite back, and I think Kimmel will see that in his ratings eventually, and as we all know, in TV, that's what counts.
Meanwhile, some criticism of the media from a member of the media, Michael Goodwin, who calls himself a liberal, wrote this in his latest column. He says, thanks to the battle over the memo, that's the Nunes memo, we also know with 100% certainty that the mainstream media is part of the swamp. The efforts by the New York Times and the Washington Post, among others, to keep the memo from ever seeing sunshine were appalling. Before it saw the memo, the Times editorial page called it proof of the Republican plot against the FBI. A Washington Post columnist warned President Trump he would be making a historic mistake in releasing it. Now, Judy, I'm going to go to you first because you did say before this memo came out that you were concerned about it releasing sources and methods. Did it do that?
Well, I don't think that it did, but it's, you know, John, it's very hard to know that. What we do know is that the FBI said that the memo wasn't accurate. You could expect them to say that since it's critical of the FBI. But even Trey Gowdy said that it did not show what Donald Trump said it showed, which is vindication of him. Look, I think we've gotten to the stage now where things are so partisan that a grandstanding show like this really distracts us from what the committee, what Robert Mueller is supposed to be looking at, which is to what extent did the Russians interfere in our election? And I think this is a very sad state of affairs. Now the Democrats want their response to the Republican memo released. I think that ought to happen. But this is all a sideshow.
And it could happen. Perhaps, you know, those wheels will get turning later today. Joe, you know, it's interesting right now. There's that movie, The Post, about the Washington Post and the New York Times uncovering government secrets. But as Michael pointed out, they were sort of advocating maintaining government secrets prior to the release of the Nunes memo.
Right. Highly secretive Pentagon papers around the Vietnam War for people who haven't seen The Post. Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep. It's supposedly an excellent movie. I plan on seeing it soon. I quote Kimberly Strassel. She's from the Wall Street Journal, and she says this: having been in journalism all my life, have never seen the press corps fight so hard against transparency. And, you know, yes, we want to know if Russians obviously meddled in our election. We do know they did. We do know that the DNC and the Clinton campaign did pay a foreign agent to obtain information from the Russians to put into a dossier that was later presented to a judge under false pretenses, not explaining exactly the political ramifications behind it, to secure a FISA warrant. That is what we know right now, yet we barely hear anything about that side of the story, and I understand it's because Hillary Clinton is not the president, but still, it deserves to be covered.
More to come on that score. Thanks very much, Joe Concha and Judy Miller.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Announced 13 indictments of individuals, 3 of companies, none of which were American, all of which were Russia, for their attempt to meddle in our elections. No word of collusion. What does this tell you about where the special counsel is and where they're going?
Well, several things here. First of all, we have to understand this began in 2014 under then President Barack Obama's nose. He didn't do a thing about it. Long before Donald Trump announced for president, this was going on. Also, it points out clearly that in this process there was no collusion, as you just pointed out. The president said it multiple times. This makes it clear and concise for the American people and proves the president correct. No collusion between Donald Trump, his campaign, and Russia. And also, I think this is important too, it did not affect the outcome of the election whatsoever. What the Russians were trying to do, as outlined by Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, was create chaos in the American election system. And I'll just say this. Right. There are 2 groups that have created chaos more than the Russians, and that's the Democrats and the mainstream media, who continued to push this lie on the American people for more than a year. And quite frankly, Americans should be outraged by that.
Right, Hogan, let me ask you quickly, though, is the president looking at sanctions against Russia?
Look, I'm not going to get ahead of the president on what he would do on that, and as you guys know, he doesn't telegraph what he's going to do in those particular instances. But all things are on the table. When people from another country come in and meddle in our elections, that's a serious issue. The president takes it seriously, and we're looking at all options at this point.
Well, the good news is, Hogan, that if you poll the American people, they were never buying the Russia collusion story anyway.
Right.
But thank you for joining us today. Great information. And we're hoping the president does do something about mental health in children in this instance.
He will. Thank you so much, Rachel, Pete,
Thank you.
Hotty Toddy Griff.
Thanks, Hogan.
Hotty Toddy.
Thank you.
All right. Now